I was born in Eyam, near Buxton, Derbyshire, which is known as the Plague Village.
Where did you spend your childhood?
Started in Eyam, then moved to Sheffield, and then out to the outskirts of Sheffield, which were actually in Derbyshire again. School.
So you were you a child or were you a teenager?
I was in primary school when war broke out, then moved to grammar school in later years when I was 11. So that would be in 1942. My mother was a full-time mother, as most mothers were in those days. My father worked for the Employment Exchange, as it was called then, now called the Job Centre. As I remember, particularly with my parents, my father thought he would get us away from Sheffield, which of course was a steel city and a big attraction for bombing. He thought he would get us to somewhere much safer, so applied for a transfer. And in their wisdom, his employers moved him to London, to the Bermondsey docks. So we did not go with him, so my parents were separated during the war, which was very unfortunate, until my mother was taken ill and father was brought back. But that was not planned, let's put it that way.
How long were your parents separated for?
It would be about 2 years. My father was in Bermondsey, in digs, which he remembers vividly, and he had blancmange for his pudding every day, which he put down in front of the radiator to warm.
Did that affect your mother a great deal? Do you remember
Yes,
that?
I think so. I think looking back, I think Mum had a very hard time of it. My visions of her are always wearing, in the cold weather, she wore her coat and her boots so that we could have fire at walks at night, and yes, and she had to take the full responsibility of looking after 2 girls and keeping us fed and watered and looked after. She was a very good, hard-working mum.
Do you not think it's a bit, well, quite extraordinary really, that your father wanted to move you to a safer place and yet he was transferred to potentially a more dangerous place, right, and still left you in a vulnerable area?
Yes, well, it was, I'm afraid it was one of those things that happened. You went where you were put, and you did as you were told by your ministry, and there was no sort of question of not going, otherwise you were jobless. I can remember Sheffield Blitz. We were up on a hill outside Sheffield and overlooked where the Blitz was, because of course it was most of the steel area, and Sheffield was just on fire. It was just one big massive red fire, and the next morning my mother decided we would get over to Eyam, the village, to my granddad's, which would be much safer. And of course we couldn't go through Sheffield, which was the direct way to get there. We had to go around through all the country villages. And my first memory is of crossing the road to catch the big double-decker bus and carrying the canary in its cage. And the canary was very important, and I wasn't bothered about the cases that everybody else had to carry. I got the canary, and we had to go, I think we probably got 4 buses to get eventually to Eyam and to my granddad's, which of course was a very small cottage, but we stayed there for quite some time. I can't remember exactly how many months, but probably most of the time until Dad came back. We were over there, but it was quite a journey.
You mentioned that one occasion. How many times did bombing occur in Sheffield? Can you remember, just roughly?
There were 2 main blitzes, I think, but I also have a memory of when I was at the grammar school, of being, we used to have a school bus, and which was out in Derbyshire, this school, and I can remember us being met off the bus by the ARP men and ushered across the road and onto a bank which was up the side of the road to the school, because there were odd planes around, and one of these planes went straight up the road, shooting us just ad lib. But we weren't frightened. We were quite excited by it all. We were, but that's the only other time that I remember. Where the plane came from, why it just odds, I don't know. But whenever anything came over was, we used to go and hide under the staircase. There was a sort of well area under the staircase. My mother clutching the tin, and the tin was always held all the important legal things, and the tin is still around to this day with all the legal things in. And we also kept these chickens in the very small back garden we had. We grew potatoes in part of the garden, but we also had these chickens, which mother, there was the smell of the mash that I can remember, because she boiled up this mash of old peelings and goodness knows what. We used to come home from school and there'd be the smell of this boiling up pan. But they supplied us with eggs, and they eventually ended up in a roast. But yeah, a friend of mine kept rabbits for the same reason. They were food, they weren't pets. Yes, I think that we didn't have pets as such. Everything had to be food, because there wasn't a lot of food. We were sort of on the edge of the cities. We weren't in farmland or anywhere, so it was quite short. I remember being hungry at times.
Were the schools affected at all by any of the bomb raids on Sheffield? I mean,
I don't know about Sheffield, but you see, we didn't go to school in Sheffield. It was, we were in Derbyshire schools, and we weren't affected, and it was a pretty modern school we're in. We were very fortunate. No, we didn't get the best of teachers, shall we say. Quite a lot of them were retired teachers, I'm afraid. But we still enjoyed being at school. Yeah. We learnt our 3 R's.